Well, we understand very fundamentally as individuals why water is important to us. Without access to water, we cannot live. But beyond ourselves, water is the fundamental fluid that actually lubricates a whole economy. There is no aspect of the economy that is possible without water. For some things it's very obvious, like agriculture or water-intensive industries, where you're using water in the boilers in order to produce electricity, and that electricity powers what we do elsewhere. But there are no things, there are no aspects, there are no activities in the economy that don't depend on water. Our entire service industry and hospitality industry depends on the availability of water. So water security for an individual is paramount. It determines your nutritional security, it determines your health security. Water security for a nation determines whether or not you're in a healthy economy or you're in an economy of decline. Water is fundamental. The Southern African region is a region of huge diversity in water. We have some of the richest water areas in the world in the form of the Great Lakes region. And in the same place, we have some of the driest places in the world below the Sahara, where we have semi-arid countries and even arid areas, large arid areas in some countries. And Namibia is a good example of this. Most of Namibia is in fact a desert. 2/3 of South Africa is in fact a desert. So the notion of water scarcity and water abundance happens inside the same place, and it creates an interesting dynamic. The second factor is that, like many places in the world, Southern Africa has organized its own development, its own settlements close to water. So along our big water courses like the Congo or the Zambezi is where we get all our large towns and cities. And yet in the same place we have some unique examples in the world of things that don't happen around water courses. So Johannesburg, as an example, is one of the biggest cities in the world that either isn't on a major river or isn't on the coast. So we also have that kind of diversity. The third factor associated with water in Southern Africa is that water in Southern Africa has huge potential to have fundamental economic leverage in the region. We are an agricultural dependent region in the world, so the availability of agriculture is core to our ability to have successful agriculture. At the same time, calculations have been made that with the rivers in Southern Africa, in particular the Congo, we have from our river systems and our lakes the potential to take care of more than 90% of the electricity needs of all of Southern Africa using hydropower as one of the bases. So water has been fundamental to Southern African development in the past. It's crucially important in the present, and potentially could take us to a much better future depending on whether or not we can organize ourselves to the right levels of access and water security for all of Southern Africa. I think that the biggest challenges for the Southern African region come from some of the big environmental factors around us. One of the things that we know is that climate change, in all of the scenarios that have been mapped out, will have a more dramatic effect on Southern Africa than it will in many other regions in the world. So while the rest of the world is talking about the possibility of moving to a 2-degree or a 4-degree increase future, what that translates to in the Southern African scenario is 4 degrees to 8 degrees. It's actually double what is elsewhere in the world. What that means for us is serious challenges around water availability. It means that we're going to have longer, drier spells, more frequent drought episodes, and less frequent wet episodes, which means our water security depends on what we can do around making the water sustainable in our system. So where are the possibilities around engaging with this? The first one is around storage. Apart from South Africa, which has a fairly good storage ratio, if we took Southern Africa as a whole, less than 14% of its storage potential is currently realized. Now, what does that mean? It means that we have the potential to organize for a further 86% storage potential to be realized in Southern Africa. So if we build the right kinds of dams, have the right kinds of transfer schemes, we have the ability to store 86% more water than we currently store in the Southern African region. This will make a huge difference to our water security. If we then get really smart about it, okay, and organize for the other challenge to be engaged in the same kind of way, then we're starting to talk about a really prosperous future. What is that other challenge? The other challenge in the Southern African region is the availability of power. So if we combine these two factors and use the water and the water storage systems to simultaneously produce power, we solve a big problem around the water energy nexus. The second set of factors associated with the Southern African challenge is, of course, our technological infrastructure. To have a really successful economy that has good agriculture, good industrialization, good services, means that we have good infrastructure. The good infrastructure is an investment that we simply have to make. And we're no longer just talking about logistics infrastructure. We're talking about road infrastructure, rail infrastructure for sure, but we're also talking about infrastructure to manage our water systems, communications infrastructure, and the basic infrastructure needed to attract and empower people to get into business in the Southern African region. So the third set of factors that we have to look at is around the arid nature of the region itself. The arid nature of the region itself is saying to us that while agriculture is the way we've been doing things for a long time, there's limited potential, even with the availability of water around going into the future. Now that means a few things. One of the things it means is that we're going to have to look at different crop types in this part of the world that's different from the other parts of the world. So we're going to need to have high yielding, low water using crop types that are also quite resistant to drought conditions. But it also means that we have to have a rapid economic diversification, because our water availability and the geography of the region is saying to us that agriculture cannot be the mainstay for economic growth going into the future. And that leads to the fourth challenge. Because the fourth challenge is to make any of this work, you've got to have high levels of human capital. You need a skills base. You need a human resource base. Now, one of the big advantages this region has, and one of the problems places like China are dealing with, places like Europe is currently dealing with, is that we have a young population. The problem in China and Japan and Europe is that they have an aging population. They are worrying about the future. Where is that future human capital going to come from? Well, the demographic of Africa is saying that, one, this young population is the available resource going into the future. You have to nurture it, you have to develop it. It is also saying to you that by 2050, this is potentially going to be not only the youngest continent in the world, but possibly the most populous continent in the world. That brings with it very particular challenges. But on the other side of that challenge is your human resources become a dividend. It becomes a boon. It gives you the ability to make a new economy work. So mapping out these challenges are important, but understanding that each of these challenges have a potential to be turned around into a success factor for the region is crucially important. You know, this is a really important thing to engage, is that we cannot organize for the development in Southern Africa to happen in the same way it has happened in other parts of the world. We have to do it in a different way. We have to do a leapfrogging. So one example of a success in the Southern African region is mobile telephony. We didn't organize ourselves to move from no communication to first have landline telephones and then go to mobile telephony. We made a leapfrog, and it's made a huge difference to the life of people in our region. Now we have to do this simultaneously in a whole range of other areas. So we need to leapfrog. We need to actually lead the world around new solutions for many of our problems. Now, organizations like the Water Research Commission then come into this play around deriving new knowledge-based solutions that are at the cutting edge of technology. Now, we have many examples. If we take these examples to scale, then we can have the kind of growth path that we desire. Now, let me give you some of these examples. One of these examples is new sanitation. So sanitation that is safe, that is improved, that is dignified, but it's not sewage-borne sanitation. It doesn't depend on you flushing 6 liters at a time to get rid of human waste. We're talking about dry sanitation with localized digesters, and we're talking about poor flush sanitation. Now, if Southern Africa can revolutionize this around organizing for these new methodologies to bring access to sanitation for the 2/3 of the people who currently don't have it in our part of the world, we will be setting up a standard not only for Africa but also for the rest of the world. Another example is around access to clean water. Now, access to clean water is a global challenge. It is one of the core goals in the SDGs, to have by 2030 every single person on earth, every single person in Southern Africa having access to safe, clean drinking water. This can be done in the old ways around having large-scale wastewater treatment plants and moving with high energy costs water into these treatment plants and cleaning it up and then pumping up for several kilometers to get it to where it needs to be. And this is going to be both unaffordable at any kind of scale, and it has logistical problems because of the terrain of Southern Africa. So the smarter solutions must come from places like the WRC. Things like point-of-use solutions for wastewater treatment, where at the point that you need to use it, you have a small package plant that can take the water from whatever source that you have, purify it on the site for it to be able to be used immediately. And using that, the new materials that we have, the new nanotechnology that we have, the new computer systems that we have to drive the nanotechnology, together with some very old, very robust, very solid indigenous knowledge that we have in this part of the world, and put those things together to have the smart new solutions for Southern Africa. Because we have been treating water on point of use for a long time in Africa. People in Ethiopia, for example, have been using jugs with different kinds of clays, and those clays actually purify the water to a reasonable extent to use. Now, we're using those kinds of clays together with new nanotechnology implants to get an even better product. So it's about using the traditional knowledge of Africa together with what the latest science can bring and organizing for sustainable solutions for ourselves. When you move to scale, though, then the small package plants are not going to work. If you need large amounts of water for big industry, millions of liters a day, then you need a very different kind of solution. And in that domain, science has come to the party as well. So what we need to do is to have scaled up versions of the laboratory work that we're doing now around desalination, for example, that will convert not only the seawater along our coastlines into usable fresh water, but the brackish, polluted water that we have in some of our mining regions, not only in South Africa, but all over this continent, to the kind of quality levels that organizes for reasonable water security for people around the region. And then places like the Water Research Commission must work with places in the agricultural research domain to help develop more water-resistant crops in order for us to organize for the nutritional security in our system. We need to work together with the Energy Institute so that we can organize joint solutions around water and energy, because people can't live on one alone. And we have very good examples in the WRC around work in this area. For example, we have a concept called the Green Village. And the Green Village is now operating in some of the rural villages in South Africa, where in places that have had no water sources or no energy sources before, now have, because we've put in water harvesting tanks so people can store the water. We're collecting the waste material from the animals and putting that into a biodigester. We mix it up with the water that we collect. That then produces methane, and methane provides usable, clean energy for communities that never had access to this before. Now, can you imagine if we scaled up that kind of activity and not just have one village here and one village there, but millions of villages all over southern Africa operating on the same scale? Not only will we organize for people's food security through having water security and energy security, but we will also organize for people to be off-grid, not contributing to climate change, not contributing to the carbon emissions, and setting out an example, frankly, that the rest of the world can follow.
Some interesting stuff there. Very interesting stuff there. Okay, that was the last question that I had. And anything you'd like to add of this? The questionnaire was developed. You developed the questionnaire, so
yes. Let me add a few thoughts and two fundamental thoughts.
Yeah.
The first thing is that for any of this to be successful, it requires a large amount of cooperation between the different countries in the region. There is no way around it, because the political boundaries are not respected by climate change. They're not respected by El Nino events. They're not respected by floods. We have to work together, and we have to recognize our interconnectedness. So in a country like South Africa, South Africans must realize that 60% of the water in South Africa is actually shared water with our neighbors. So the cooperation between countries is absolutely paramount. And we have a great start on this, because the international indices are telling us that the level of water cooperation in South Africa and its neighbors are among the best in the world. And we have to build on this, and we have to expand this throughout the Southern African region. The second issue is that we need to be developing the young people from today. They're not only the leaders of tomorrow, they're going to be leaders of countries tomorrow. Today, these young people are the leaders of the youth. And in those communities, they need to be empowered to become ambassadors around better water stewardship for their countries, for their communities, for the entire Southern African region. And this is a project that we have to work with at haste. It's something that we really have to build. And the last point is recognizing the importance of people. People are not just the users of water and the beneficiary of services. People themselves have an ability to manage resources in a way that organizes for the future prosperity for all of us. People need to be empowered in order to be able to do so. So the whole notion of citizen science becomes paramount. Our ability to empower young people and people in communities with the right kind of toolboxes that allows them to monitor the quality of their water resources, to allow them to control and manage how those resources are used, to allow them to ensure the future security of those resources, means that if we all do this together, the collective water security of the Southern African region is in fact guaranteed.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think we